All right, we are in part 2 of Address the Mess, and last week we talked about the fact that everybody has a mess, and so it's not just you, regardless of what you think and how you feel, and sometimes our messes are our own fault, like we said something or did something that created the mess. Sometimes the mess is other people's fault. They said something or did something that messed on us, and sometimes the mess is really nobody's fault at all. It's just the way circumstances fell. And so last week at the end of this service, if you were here, we had a mess in the building. And so due to the deconstruction that's going on outside, our sprinkler line main was exposed. And I guess some mud had slid down and landed on top of that and found a vulnerable spot. And it broke, and water had nowhere to go but into our hallway and into our elementary environments. And it created a massive mess, and our emergency response team was on it, and it was neutralized in like 5 minutes. But the cleanup lasted for quite a while, and so today, like, you wouldn't even know there was a mess. We're no worse for the wear, and we're super blessed, by the way, that mess happened during church, because if it had happened after hours or before hours and nobody was here, this entire building would have been flooded. I kid you not. So it was a mess, but it could have been messier. Could have been messier. And unlike early reports, early intel said it was sewage, was not sewage. Praise God, or I would have just burnt the whole thing down. We'd start over. I ain't doing it, okay? But so we're fortunate it wasn't that, because it could have been messier. Have you ever made a mess messier? Have you ever made a mess messier? Have you ever spilled anything on your carpet and you rubbed rather than dabbed, okay? Or on your shirt, you rubbed rather than dabbed. If you rub something like that, it will make the mess messier. So every mess comes with some choices we're going to talk about today. Every mess comes with some choices, and the choices we make in the mess will either make things better or they will make things worse. When I was 16 years old, I'd had my driver's license for maybe about 6 months, and I was on my way home. It was a Saturday night, so I was trying to make curfew, and so I was exceeding the speed limit, and coming towards me in the opposite direction, I noticed was a state trooper, and I immediately looked down at my speedometer to confirm what I already knew to be true, and before he even passed me, he flipped his lights on. And now, it was a 4-lane bypass, okay? So he had to go probably another quarter of a mile before he could turn around and head eastbound after me. And I'm panicking, right? I'm a brand new driver. I knew he clocked me for speeding. And so I went into self-preservation mode. If he catches me, my dad will kill me, all right? And so maybe I can get to my turnoff before he ever gets close enough, and he'll just lose me, okay? So I accelerate, all right? So I'm in a mess. I'm trying to get out of it. I'm 16. The prefrontal lobe is still in development, all right? I'm 46. It's still in development. And this is before Jesus. Okay, so don't judge me. I'm just telling you the story. So I've got 2 intersections. I've got two intersections between me and hard time, all right? So the first intersection is coming up quickly. The light is green. I'm watching in the rearview mirror. I see him turn around, and he's still pretty far behind me. When I look back at the intersection, the light that was green is now red. So, man, I slam on the brakes. It had been raining, so the road was wet, so I didn't stop. I slid right through the intersection, and now I have another choice to make. So I hit the gas, okay? So prefrontal lobe and all that, all right? So now I've run a red light. This is awesome. I mean, it's just getting messier and messier and messier. And maybe I should just pull over and take it like a man. I mean, he's still way behind me, but I'm not a man. I'm a teenage boy, prefrontal lobe, right? So I hit the gas. I get to the next intersection. I hang a right on 460. This is my turnoff. I'm watching in the rearview mirror. The state trooper is moving through the intersection, right? And I think Bo and Luke Duke in my Escort GT. I just outran the law, okay? So, and then he stops, and he turns right. And he gets right up on my bumper in about 3 seconds, and I pull over thinking, man, I'm done. And he comes up to my window, and he says, now, do you know why I'm pulling you over? I'm like, well, could be a lot of reasons at this point. I I'm just going to plead the fifth. And so he explains I was doing 69 and a 55. He didn't say anything about the red light or about the 2-mile chase that had just ensued. So I drove away with just a speeding ticket, super lucky. It could have been way worse. It should have been way worse because I was making a mess messier. Now, when we're in a mess, we just want to get out, right? And we said last week, a mess is when something isn't as it should be. I shouldn't have been speeding. I was speeding. I created a mess, and my instinct was to get out of the mess as quickly as possible. And we all have this instinct. We know that the mess is substandard, and we just want to get back to standard. And we want to get back to the unmess. Now, it's impossible to unmake a mess. You can't unmess a mess. Once a mess is made, it's a mess. Like you can't unscramble eggs, you can't unmess a mess. But you can make a mess messier. You can make it messier. You can make your marriage mess messier. You can make your financial mess messier. You can make your ethical mess messier. You can make your job mess messier. And sometimes the easiest way out of the mess is to do the wrong thing. All right? Try to outrun them. Borrow more money. Tell a bigger lie. Cover it up. Walk away from the marriage. Those are easy ways out, but they're not the right ways out. And the wrong thing may be easier, but it always leads to messier. It always leads to messier. See, every mess comes with some choices. It's impossible to avoid messy, all right? We're all going to be messy. We're people. We live in a messy world. We live around messy people. Everybody's messy. Everybody has a mess. But it is impossible, it is possible to avoid error. We can avoid error. And so today I'm going to talk about error. I'm going to tell you a story from the Bible that some of you are familiar with. Some of you maybe know a few details. Others of you may have never heard the story at all. But it's the story of a guy named Joseph who ended up in one mess after another, and none of the messes were his fault. He was the second youngest of 12 brothers, and he was actually a half-brother. He was one of 2 children that Jacob had with Rachel, who was his favorite wife. Now you can see where this is going. It's messy. So Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. In fact, he gives him the title of the firstborn. Even though like he was 11th down, he gives him the title of the firstborn, which means that the firstborn son in that culture always gets a double portion of the father's inheritance. So all of his brothers, they're laborers. Joseph is more like a manager, right? He's got the coat of many colors. Maybe you heard of that. This coat, it designates him as kind of a manager, a leader. So this doesn't do anything for healthy family dynamics. His brothers hate him. And so they plot to get rid of him, and instead of killing him, they actually sell him into slavery. So I'm just giving you the high-level story. We're skipping lots of details. But it's all messy, and it's not his fault. And so he ends up as a slave in Egypt, and he becomes a servant of a guy named Potiphar, who is high up as one of Pharaoh's officials. And Pharaoh really likes Joseph. The problem is, so does his wife. And so one day when Potiphar's out and Joseph comes in, she tries to seduce him. Now, every mess comes with some choices. So he's in a mess, and Joseph makes the right choice. He runs away and he escapes. But as he's escaping, she grabs a piece of his clothing. And she feels so dejected that when Potiphar gets home, she fabricates the story that Joseph tried to seduce her, and she uses the clothing to frame him. And he is put in prison for the next 22 years. Messy, but not his fault. Now, 22 years in prison will give you some time to think. It'll give you a lot of time to grow angry and bitter and resentful if you let it. It's time to kind of plot your revenge that was caused by all the people who were opposed to you, who stood against you, and to think about what you might do to those people when you get out. And Joseph eventually gets out. He has a gift of interpreting dreams. And Pharaoh has a dream, a disturbing dream. And Joseph is brought before Pharaoh to interpret his dream. And Pharaoh is so impressed with Joseph that he not only releases him from prison, he gives him a position in his cabinet. He puts him in charge of overseeing the food distribution program for all of Egypt to ensure that all the people have enough food during the 7-year famine that's coming. And so after 22 years of one mess after another, Joseph finally gets redemption, and a few years later, he gets the opportunity for revenge. So the famine has wreaked havoc on the land. And his brothers travel to Egypt to get food. And so they have to stand before the director of the FDP, the Food Distribution Program. They stand before Joseph. This brother that they made a mess of, all right? And they don't recognize him. A lot of time has passed. They sold him into slavery when he was a teenager. He's pushing 50. He looks like an Egyptian. He talks like an Egyptian. He walks like an Egyptian. These are the facts. But he recognizes them. So let me just stop there and ask this question. What would you do? What would you do if you were Joseph? Because you are second in command. You can do anything your heart desires. He could have had them arrested and thrown into the same prison cell where he lived out his 20s and 30s, the formidable years of his life, he spent behind bars. They made his life a mess. He now has the opportunity to make theirs messier. And every mess comes with a choice. And so Joseph is sitting right here, right here. These are the crossroads between messy and This is where Joseph is. And for some of you today, this is where you are. You're in a mess. Life is messy. And every mess comes with some choices. And depending on what we choose, we can make it better or we can make it worse. And some of you are just right here and just a little to the right, and you're in the land of Ur. That's where you are. Now, if you know this story, I want you to just pretend like you don't. I just want you to live in the tension for a few minutes, because before I tell the rest of the story, I want to go back one generation to look at the messiness of his father Jacob and how one decision that Jacob makes in the middle of the mess sets up this moment in the life of Joseph. So Joseph didn't create any of his messes. If you know anything about Jacob, he created all of his messes. And so Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. Abraham was chosen by God to be the father of the nation of Israel, this nation that would bear the Messiah, this nation from which Jesus would come, who would eventually save us all from our mess. And so if you were reading the Bible reading program that I challenged you to last week, you've met Abraham, you've met Isaac. Tomorrow you will meet Jacob and his brother Esau. So Abraham's son Isaac has two sons, twin boys, Jacob and Esau. All right, Jacob is born just seconds after Esau, and it's almost like he knew what that meant, because it says he was clutching his heel as he was coming out. It was like Jacob was trying to wrestle with Esau for position in the womb, because the firstborn son, remember, gets a double portion of the father's inheritance. And years later, when they're grown, and Isaac is an old man and he's on his deathbed, it's time to give his blessing to his firstborn by only a few seconds, Esau. And Jacob doesn't like what's about to happen, and so he intervenes. Now these two guys are complete opposites. They're twins. They're a complete opposite. Esau was a man's man. He was hairy. He was a skilled hunter like me. And Jacob was more smooth-skinned, didn't like the woods, more of a Marriott guy, like John Weinberger, who led us in worship today. And so... Dude, my bad. He did let me know he's more of a Hilton guy. So sorry about that, John. And before Isaac gives Esau his blessing, he asked him to go out and kill some wild game and bring it back for him to eat. And while Esau is out hunting, their mom, Rebekah, she went to Jacob and says, here's your opportunity. See, Rebekah favored Jacob. messy. And she's going to help him steal Esau's blessing. So she makes some stew. She puts Esau's clothes on him so he'll smell like Esau. She wraps goat skin around his neck and his arms so that he'll feel like Esau. He'll feel hairy. So Jacob goes into the room and he tells his father that he's Esau. And Isaac says, okay, come over here so I can touch you, because he can't see. And Jacob walks over nervously, and Isaac touches him, and he says, okay, you have the voice of Jacob, but the hands of Esau. Are you really Esau? So this question, hang on to this question. Are you really Esau? And Jacob says, I am Esau. And he bent down, and he kissed him, and Isaac gets a whiff of him, and he says, oh, the smell of my son. It's the smell of the field. And Isaac gives him his blessing. And this ceremony is legally binding. There are no take-backs. When it's done, it's done. And so Jacob hurries out of the room. And a few hours later, Esau comes back. And he enters Isaac's room. And he says, okay, Dad, I'm ready for my blessing. The Bible says that Isaac trembled violently. And he said, your brother came and deceitfully took your blessing. And Esau comes unglued. And he vows to kill Jacob. Jacob made a mess, and every mess comes with some choices. Every mess comes with some decisions. Every mess comes with some options. Jacob had the choice to humble himself right now and say, you know what, that was not cool. That was not cool of me. And I realize it can't be undone, but I will give you everything that rightfully belongs to you. That would have been the right thing to do in the moment, but instead he runs. And he leaves, and he goes to another part of the country to live with his uncle Laban to escape the clutches of Esau. And this is where Jacob falls in love with his cousin Rachel. Please, no Kentucky jokes. I've heard them all, okay? This is a different part of the world. Jacob strikes a deal with Laban. He says, I want to marry Rachel, and I will work for you for free for 7 years. I only ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. And Laban agrees. And so 7 years passes, 7 years of hard labor. It's now time for the wedding. It's the night for the ceremony. And on the wedding night, Laban had changed his mind because Leah was the older daughter. And he said, it wouldn't be right for me to give Rachel before Leah. But he doesn't tell Jacob this, so he brings Leah to the wedding, and Jacob does not know. He marries the wrong sister, and in the morning he wakes up to Leah, and he is livid, and he goes to Laban, and he said, you deceived me. Now this is the pot calling the kettle black, right? Had Jacob stayed and addressed the mess with his brother, none of this would have ever happened, but he took the easy way out, and he did the wrong thing, and the mess keeps getting messier. Now instead of marrying the girl of his dreams, he's married, to Leah, her sister. He's living out this nightmare, and he's so frustrated, but Laban agrees to give him Rachel if he'll work for another 7 years. He says, if you'll fulfill your marriage responsibilities for this week, I will give you Rachel for another 7 years of labor. And he doesn't have to wait the whole 7 years, so he agrees. And now a week later, he marries Rachel, and so he has sister wives, okay? What could possibly go wrong? When? No. Messier. And so Rachel struggled with infertility, but Leah was having babies hand over fist. And so Rachel is jealous because she can't have any children. So she devises a plan. She says, I want you to sleep with my maidservant, and she will have children for me. Messier. But she bears him 2 sons. Meanwhile, Leah hasn't been able to have more children. She gave him 4 sons, but now she's not able to have children. So she draws up the same play. She gives Jacob her maidservant, Messier. She bears him 2 sons. Now it's harvest season, and Leah's son Reuben, who is Rachel's nephew, but also stepson, is so strange. But he goes out to harvest mandrakes, and Rachel wants some mandrakes. And Leah says, wait a minute, is it not enough that you took my husband, now you want my mandrakes? You took my man, now you want my mandrakes, okay? And she's like, fair enough. I'll tell you what, here's what I'll do. I'll let Jacob sleep with you tonight in exchange for some mandrakes. Messier. Like when you say the Bible's boring, what parts are you reading, okay? This is in the holy word of God right here. I'm telling you the story. So Jacob sleeps with Leah. She bears him a fifth son, then a sixth son, and then a daughter. Now, eventually, Rachel gets pregnant, and she gives birth to Joseph. And then eventually to Benjamin. And now Jacob goes to Laban and says, listen, I've been here a long time. It's time for me to make my own life, to take my family and make our own way. And Laban says, okay, what do I owe you? And he says, why don't you just give me all the spotted sheep and the spotted lambs, and I'll take that as my payment. Laban agrees. Now, Jacob has another choice because every mess comes with some choices. And so he finds himself here in the crossroads again. Do I stick with Messy or do I go with Ur? Do I go to the land of Ur? Jacob does not have a track record. Prefrontal lobe for him has not fully developed. So he opts for Ur. He actually creates a scenario where the solid sheep would produce spotted lambs, which essentially makes him super wealthy and leaves Laban in the poorhouse. He had never let go of Laban's deceit, and he just keeps making one mess after another. And Genesis 31 says this, Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. I love this next verse. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Weird. Laban is furious. Jacob's a mess. And every mess comes with some decisions, some choices. And Jacob chooses messier. And rather than addressing the mess, he runs again. Laban pursues him, but God intervenes because remember, God is making a nation out of this mess. He's making a nation out of this mess. Jacob deceived Isaac to get the blessing, and so Jacob is the mess that God is going to use as the line to eventually bear the Messiah. Now, if you've ever thought you're too much of a mess to be used by God, you got nothing on Jacob. Messes are all God uses. You know why? Because messes are all he has available. We are all a mess. So God comes to Laban in a dream, and he says, don't say anything good or bad to Jacob. Just hold it. And the next day, Laban catches up with Jacob, and Jacob's mess is about to get addressed, and he is so fearful that he is about to lose everything. He's in a corner, and Laban says, listen, I have the power to harm you. I have the power to kill you. I have the power to make your mess messier. But last night, God came to me and said, don't say anything, good or bad. And Jacob was spared. And he and Laban reconcile, and Jacob realizes something very important, and it's something that you need to realize too, whatever your mess is that God has continued to pursue him. That God has never taken his eyes off of him, and something starts to change in Jacob. And Jacob starts to soften, and after 20 years of hatred between him and Esau, after 20 years of this dysfunctional relationship, of this fear that Esau is going to murder him, it's time to address this mess because he is tired and he is worn out from running and from hiding and from lying. And maybe that's where you are today. Like you've just made one mess after another because we're so good at making messes messier, and you're just tired. You're tired of running. You're tired of doing the wrong thing. You're tired of covering up. You're tired of strained relationships. If that's your story, then this story is for you, so don't miss it. All Jacob knows to do, all he knows to do at this point, he's got nowhere to go but to God. He's never been much to have a relationship with God. God was the God of his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham, but hasn't really been his God. Jacob was just kind of doing things his own way. But that hadn't turned out too well. And so now he has no place left to go. He prepares a gift to take to his brother. He puts his family, hides his family in a safe place in case his brother kills him. And he spends the night alone, wrestling with God, literally speaking. God comes to him in human form, and he comes to him as a man, and they go at it. They wrestle, and God gives him a right hook to the hip, and Jacob doesn't give up. He keeps wrestling with God all through the night until daybreak, and finally God says, let me go. And Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. I mean, this is just amazing. It's like Jacob has hit rock bottom. He knows that unless God does something, that unless God blesses him, Esau is going to kill him, and only the hand of God can save him. Now, only God can bless this mess. And then God asks him a question, very important question. He says, what is your name? Now, remember the last time that Jacob was asked this question was by his father. When he stood in his room about to steal his brother's blessing, his dad said, are you Esau? And Jacob lied. And so God is not asking this because he wants to know. It's not like he doesn't know who this is. He's asking it for Jacob's benefit. Because here's a spiritual truth. You don't come to the end of yourself until you admit who you really are. You don't come to the end of yourself until you admit who you really are. Things don't turn around until you decide to pull over and confess your mess. God doesn't change us until we admit who we are and what we are. Jacob was a schemer and a deceiver, and God can't change him until he's willing to come and admit who he is. And Jacob has a choice in this moment because every mess comes with some choices. And in this moment, he responds honestly, and he says, I am Jacob. And look what God says. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans. And look at that last part. And have overcome. God says, you struggled with me, and you struggled relationally with your dad, with your mom, with your brother, with your wives, with your father-in-law. You've made a mess of all these relationships. And you have overcome. You've overcome. See, Jacob's entire life had been a struggle, one mess after the next, and his life up to this point had been this selfish pursuit of wealth at the expense of his own family, and for the first time, he admits who he really is, and God changes his name because now he's somebody new. He's an overcomer. Like this experience changed him forever. When Jacob meets up with his family, he's a new man with a new name. He looks different. He walks different. He's limping. Because he'd gone at it with God, and now God had given him a dose of humility, and it changed him. And now he prepares to meet Esau, and he stands up on the hill, and he looks over the horizon, and he sees 400 of Esau's men coming from him. I'm sure he's trembling in that moment, but Esau has a new faith. He has a new identity. He has a new name. He has a new courage. God was no longer just the God of his grandfather and his father. God was now his God, and so he limps toward his brother, and he bows down. He took the posture that he should have taken 20 years earlier prior to this mess. But every mess comes with some choices. And if you've made some bad choices, and if you've made your mess messier, take a cue from Jacob, because here's what that means. It's never too late to do the right thing. Like if you've made your mess messier, just do the right thing right now. Just do the right thing right now. Okay, you walked away from your marriage and it made a mess. You can't undo that. You can't unmess that. But it's gotten messier because of bitterness and anger and resentment. And your kids are the ones who are paying the price for that. Like nobody's winning if that's your situation. Because bitterness and anger and resentment, it's substandard. It's not what God created. It's not what God created. And this is how you get out of You just do the right thing right now. And sometimes the right thing is the hard thing. Maybe it's an apology. All right, maybe it's a phone call to say, you know what, we just need to get on the same page here. Because this isn't about me and it's not about you. It's about our kids. We need to do what's best for them. If you want to avoid messier, you just do the right thing right now. It doesn't matter what you did 5 years ago. It doesn't matter what you did 5 months ago. It doesn't matter what you did 5 days ago to create the mess. What's the right thing that you need to do right now? And for some of you, it's like you need to go home and just cut up the credit cards. All right, for some of you, it's just coming clean and telling the truth. For some of you, it's forgiving that person. I mean, is this the last person on earth you want to forgive? But let me just ask you a question. Has not forgiving them made your life any better? No, because it's the wrong thing. A lack of forgiveness hasn't done anything to hurt the other person. It just keeps you from moving forward. So what's the right thing to do right now? Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. And so Jacob does the right thing, not having any idea how this is going to play out, not having any idea how Esau is going to respond, because now Esau has a choice. Jacob has gone before him. He's bowed down before him. And Esau has a choice, because every mess comes with some choices. And Esau's life has been made a mess by his brother. And now he has a choice in this moment. He can forgive Jacob, or he can make the mess messier. And here's what he does. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. And he threw his arms around his neck and kissed him. And they wept. I mean, what a moment. What a moment. Like 20 years had passed, and that was long enough. And so Esau lets go of his issue and embraces his brother that caused the issue, because that was the right thing to do right then. Now, Jacob tells the story right to his kids. He's a new man, and so multiple times over dinner, he tells them about the messes that he made. He tells them how God pursued him and never gave up on him, and he tells them how Uncle Esau forgave him and how their relationship was restored. And Joseph is just a little boy listening to these stories. And now he's a grown man. And the brothers that made a mess of his life are standing before him, just like his dad who made a mess of Esau's life. And his brothers are standing there, and he has a choice to make, because every mess comes with some choices. Joseph can do anything he wants to do. He's the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. And here's what he does. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close. And when they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt, the one that you made a mess of. And now do not be distressed because of your mess. And do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Joseph chooses to do the right thing right now. He could have done anything. He could have had them arrested. He could have had them killed. But neither of those were the right thing to do. And it really comes down to this. Here's the question. Here's what I want you to leave with today. When you're in a mess, what story do you want to tell when you get out? When you're in a mess, what story do you want to tell when you get out? Because here's the thing I want you to know. Whatever your mess is right now, you will get out. No mess lasts forever. Every mess eventually comes to an end. And what story do you want to tell when you get out? And I know that right now the mess that you're in feels like it's defining. It feels like it's never going to end. It feels like the most painful thing you've ever experienced. It feels like this is going to be the story of your life for the rest of your life. But I promise you, you will get out. Every mess eventually comes to an end. Every mess eventually becomes past tense. Every mess is eventually reduced to one sentence. And 5 years ago, I went through a terrible divorce. Painful mess then, one sentence now. And 3 years ago, I got fired from my job. It was the most confusing time in my life. Confusing mess then, one sentence now. You know what? 2 years ago, we filed bankruptcy. Things are just falling apart. Discouraging and disappointing mess then, one sentence now. And a year ago, I was addicted. A year ago, I got arrested. A year ago, I flunked out of school. A mess then, a sentence now. See, these messes that feel defining in the moment are eventually reduced to one sentence. And here's what that means. The mess is not your story. Your response to the mess is your story. So whatever mess you're in right now, what story do you want to tell when you get out? Because that part is completely up to you. Whether you caused the mess, whether somebody else caused the mess, whether nobody caused the mess at all, how you respond to the mess is completely up to you. You are in complete control of your response to the mess. Now, you can't unmess it, but you can avoid messier. And when Esau stood before Jacob, maybe he asked this question: what story do I want to tell? What story do I want to tell? Maybe Joseph, as he stood before his brothers, maybe he asked this question: what story do I want to tell? See, whatever mess you're in, you got to do the right thing right now, and you got to think about, you got to play it forward. When I get out, because you will get out, what do I want the story to be? And as Joseph stood there, I think he probably asked that question: what I want the story to be. Do I want to tell my grandchildren about how I got revenge on my brothers and they came to see me and I tossed them in prison and I eventually had their heads cut off? I got them back for the mess they made of my life. Is that the story I want to tell? Or do I want to tell the story about the mess they made and how God used that mess to save a nation and how eventually I was able to forgive my brothers with the help of my God? I mean, isn't that a better story? So, doing what's right won't make the story on the nightly news, but it will make the story better for you and for the people that you love most. So listen, don't do anything that you will regret. Don't do anything that a year from now you wish you hadn't done. Don't do something that you wish you could go back in time and do over. Lying is easier. Cheating is easier. Running is easier. Leaving is easier. Quitting is easier. But easier only makes your mess messier. So just do the right thing right now. See, ultimately, that's what it means to follow Jesus. It's why we want you to follow Jesus. No, he doesn't make life easier. We've said that, but he does make it better by helping us to choose to do what's right so that we can write a better story. See, Jesus says, follow me. Follow me. And sometimes the mess we're in is because we went around. We didn't follow. Follow means you got to stay behind. But you got to stay close enough to see where he goes. Follow me, and I will lead you around all of these choices that will lead to messier, and I will lead you out so that your life can be a mess edge of who I am and how I redeem broken things and how I make all things new. See, here's what I know about you. That's the story you want to tell. That's the story we all want to tell. And here's how we tell that story. We just do the right thing right now. Let me pray for you. We'll take communion. Thanks, God, for these stories in the Bible of messy, messy people and of your grace that covers it all. So, Father, would you lift our eyes today? Would you help us to see? Would you help us to envision the kind of story that we want to tell, regardless of the mess we're in? And would you help us to know what that right thing to do is right now? And would you give us the courage to do it? The wrong thing is easy to do. The right thing is often so hard to do, but it's always the better thing to do. God, and I know it's why we need each other. Help us to do hard things because right things always make a better story. And thank you for the story of Jesus who became one of us, for this mess that you used to eventually produce the Messiah who would come and save us from the mess. And we just remember that moment right now through this time of communion.